work to really understand the issue of eviction, its impact on both tenants and landlords, and really importantly, what's working. And we have seen Robin and Lori and the Friends Association's really incredible work, actually since the beginning of the pandemic. And the whole purpose of our conversation today is really to highlight their really, really impressive results helping tenants avoid eviction and the outcomes that they've been able to make happen in a number of courts in Chester County. We're so impressed by this that we've done a lot of work to really understand the details of what they're doing and why it's working. And we have actually kind of a lot of resources now on how to replicate a program like this, because eviction is such a big challenge. It's so devastating, but we know from Friends Association and we know from a number of folks across the state that we really can do something to help stabilize tenants. So please check out our resources, and we're going to get into the program and how it works and why today. Eviction remains a pretty insidious problem, and there's a lot of reasons why we believe that it really needs to be a very, very high community priority. It's about racial equity, but it's also about how once a household has an eviction on their record, the vast majority of landlords will not rent to them. And that means that families end up in a worse situation than they would be without that eviction filing. And they end up having to find a home we know from research that's in a neighborhood with higher poverty and crime rates. So again, it's taking a bad situation and making it worse. So in our work here at the Housing Alliance to understand, okay, we know there's a problem, but what seems to be working? In addition to the program we're going to talk about today, there are a number of programs across the state and across the country that are really putting together a few different components. Sometimes there's not adequate funding. That actually seems like a ridiculous statement. There's never adequate funding, right? Sometimes there's a community might have only one of these components. One of these components is better than none, but we're seeing that all three of them together really is making a difference. And this can look a little bit different. So direct assistance, meaning rental assistance, is often a huge part of a program if that's available. Dispute settlement, which could be mediation by a third party. It could be mediation by an attorney that's representing the tenant. And then, of course, connecting tenants who are struggling to pay their rent with other resources to try to prevent the issue from occurring again. These programs are not intended to solve every issue or every problem. They're intended to really stop the eviction, help the tenant stay in their home, hopefully repair the communication between the tenant and the landlord. But it's also, of course, obviously important to connect people to other resources to try to, like I already said, prevent it from happening again. The work that we've done in analyzing the outcomes of this program and others really focuses on the court case data. And once an eviction and the tenant and landlord get to court, there are a few different outcomes, with the vast majority of outcomes usually ending up being judgment in favor of the landlord, which means the eviction is going to proceed. We've really focused, and what you're going to see as the results of the Friends Association's work is we've really focused on where programs are able to increase the number of cases that are withdrawn by the landlord or settled between the landlord and tenant. And we focus here because it implies that there's been some resolution of the conflict. So what Friends Association and partners have been able to do in Chester County, focus on the blue, which is data from the courts where they are working. They've been able to increase the percentage of cases that are withdrawn and settled by over 40% to a 63% number. And I mean, I just want to stop and say that's incredible. I mean, this is a problem that we often think once you get to this point that there's nothing that can be done. And that's not the case. And so really thank you to Robin and Lori and the whole team for showing us what's actually possible. This data is for Chester County, but this is true generally across the state, that the vast majority of eviction filings rather, are filed because there is past due rent, reminding us that the main problem here is that people generally can't afford their housing, especially when they're making low wages. And that's really where the work has focused on, is helping people who are behind in paying their rent. The courts where Friends Association is operating are among the courts that have the highest share of evictions in the county. As people may or may not know, the Housing Alliance does have data for every county in the state, with the exception of Philadelphia, because Philadelphia is a different system. And lots of times when people are thinking about starting a program, they start with, well, which court and which judge has the highest burden in terms of landlord-tenant cases. And that might be one reason why a judge would be interested in partnering and in some way. And we do have this data available to folks. So I'm now going to turn it over to Robin and Lori, and I'm going to pose a number of questions. So first, I want to welcome Robin Sense, is the Chief Operating Officer for Friends Association, and Lori Kemps is the Chief Legal Officer for Friends Association. And my first question for you both is, first, feel free to give a brief introduction about yourselves and or the organization. And can you just tell folks, how does your program work?
Sure, let me share my screen. So thank you for having us. Friends Association, I'm going to talk as I bring this up, is a long-established nonprofit in Westchester. We work all throughout Chester County, and we just had our 200-year anniversary 2 years ago, so it's 202 years old. Our full name is Friends Association for Care and Protection of Children, so we do have that focus on families. Our organization provides program and services that are designed to prevent homelessness and promote housing stability to households throughout the county. So our programs kind of have 4 different, we call them pillars. So promote, prevent, provide, and partner. Our programs promote housing stability. They prevent homelessness. They provide housing assistance, and we partner internally and externally. And we have housing focused case management. We have case management specifically for those who are recently incarcerated. We have our emergency family shelter, which has 6 units that allow intact families. And we have a reentry home for women who are working to get custody of their children back. So Eviction Prevention Case Resolution program, EPCR, as you'll see it on the slides, is one of our housing programs designed and administered by Friends Association. So Lori is the expert here. So I will turn it over to Lori.
So good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to let you know that happy that we are here and have been invited to give this presentation and can share some of what it is that we're doing. Thank you to the Housing Alliance for generating some of the data, which I think helps support our program. So EPCR program, as the chief legal officer and the managing attorney for the program, we actually modeled our program off of what they were doing in Montgomery County, which is the EPIC program, as well as the Philadelphia County Lawyer of the Day program. So we didn't invent the wheel. We just tried to take it and make it fit for our county and for our organization. One of the reasons why I think that our program is so successful is because Friends Association has all of those other programs that Robin mentioned. EPCR is a court-based program that provides a combination of limited legal services, limited financial assistance, and limited short-term housing stability case management or relocation assistance, which I believe is on the next slide. So how does EPCR work? That was the question that was posed. The program does what it can to stop homelessness with day of court education, mediation, negotiation, and litigation. The education is for both the landlords, the tenants, sometimes the court. The mediation is between the parties. The negotiation is between the parties. And sometimes the best way to resolve a case is to actually litigate it. We try to do all of this day of court, or we are shifting our model back to being able to catch cases once there's a notice to quit before the eviction action is filed. As was stated earlier, just having that eviction action filed is normally not good for a household to maintain housing stability going forward. So one of the reasons why the program, I think, works is that we have a goal to avoid judgment and maintain a safe, stable housing for eligible tenants. Eligible tenants are those that are at or below 50% of the average mean income with either a pending eviction action or at risk of eviction. And then we have program workflow, which includes outreach. And I think the outreach is probably one of the most important workflow elements. We conduct the intake. We have legal review of all cases that are filed within the jurisdictions in which we operate. We'll do a case consultation with the tenant, do some education with the tenant as well as the landlord. We try to resolve the case, and then we will also do referrals to social service resources so that the household will be helpful going forward with regard to maintaining that stability or increasing the housing stability. We provide the resolution through representation, legal representation, rental assistance, and then referrals both internally and externally to our partner agencies. So I know Phyllis's next question, and that is, why does EPCR work so well? So the short answer, a lot of hard work and a little bit of creativity and innovation along the way. Wait, stop. I think I've got a better answer. Shared objective, prevention of homelessness is the goal of all of the parties involved. Ironically, you would think that we would have adversarial relationships with landlords, but that's not necessarily the case. We find that the landlords also find it very distressful to evict households. They may be frustrated, but after you have a conversation or can listen to their concerns, they don't really want to throw a family out onto the street. We have a team approach. The EPCR program operates as a team. The team is led by the staff attorney. We have a court coordinator, a housing and resource navigator that can provide relocation assistance as well as short-term case management. We have administrative support, and then I throw the tenant in as part of the team approach. They definitely need to be invested. They have to do their part to help us help them. As I mentioned earlier, we have outreach. Our outreach is both to the tenants and the landlord. So if we can't get in touch with a tenant, we will still communicate with the landlord. The more information we have before court, the more successful we can be in resolving it. And then we have preparation. Again, I'm an attorney, so I'm used to preparation. It's high pressure, time sensitive, and it is constant. We prep cases before court, at court, after court, and all times in between. There's an awful lot of preparation. As we discussed, our team approach, which is one of the keys to this, it takes all 5 of the individuals that are part of the team to resolve these cases. Some of them you might not need everybody on the team, but without the administrative support to keep our files and stuff in order and follow through with getting check requests and that type of stuff taken care of, the court coordinators to kind of liaison between the court to get landlord-tenant complaints and those types of scenarios, housing and resource navigator to assist families in accessing benefits, and then the staff attorney who's kind of guiding which is going to be a possible resolution with regard to the program. I would add that off to the side, although they're not an official member of the team, it would be the court. So one of the questions that was presented to us is, what is the role of the courts? How do we get judges on board and those types of cooperations that are needed? One of the keys is you have to try to get your court to do a unified scheduling like they do in criminal court systems, so that all the landlord-tenant eviction actions in that jurisdiction are filed on, or that are filed are scheduled for the same date at the same time, or at least in periodic increments during that same time period. Otherwise, you can't staff the program. We need cooperation from the court as well as the court staff, because we often will ask them to provide us copies of landlord-tenant complaints as well as current court lists, or update us with regard to whether a case has in fact been resolved or continued. You'll need a judge who's got an awful lot of patience. They need to be patient so that we have the time and the opportunity to kind of work the case out. Sometimes it takes a lot more time than you would think, but the judge also has judicial economy to worry about and their own schedule. But a lot of this is the patience of listening to each side vent their concerns and issues, again, which is why we do the outreach as much as we can beforehand, so that once we're at court, we can move quickly. There has to be accountability to the court, that we show up on time, that we're as prepared as we possibly can, that we act professionally with all parties that we encounter, that the program has accountability, so that if we say that we will provide a check, that we actually do provide the check within the time frame that we have indicated, that if we work out an agreement and then the tenant doesn't hold up to their end of the bargain, that we follow through with what we knew the consequence would be had they not. So that accountability, again, is kind of establishing yourself so that the court's not getting complaints and that everybody's walking out happy. Then we need to have some consistency. As an attorney, one of the most difficult things is a judge that is inconsistent with their rulings. Once we know that there's a judge and there's some consistency with how they're going to rule on what would be considered reasonable late fees, or what would be a adequate notice to quit, going forward, then it makes it a whole lot easier because we can predict what the outcome would be. And it, again, helps all parties, including the landlords. And then we need the recognition. You need to recognize that the court, when they are accommodating your program, are kind of helping out to assist everybody. But the recognition is also that by preventing evictions, it is good for the community. It is good for the landlords. It's good for the county, and that it is a better solution than the current one. You also have to have, again, that recognition by the court that really nobody wants to evict families and make them street homeless. So our last question, which is the big one, what is the state of the program post-pandemic? It's evolving, but the program has been evolving and will, I think, continue to be evolving for as long as it's in existence. Our program actually started mid-pandemic in September of 2020. We had things with regard to moratoriums, then there was CARES funding, there was federal moratorium, there was then ERAP funding. So we have to constantly be able to change. So when you design your program, you have to be able to meet the needs as they present themselves and be able to shift and within your program The good news is that you're going to have a little bit of a heads up as to what's happening because you have boots on the ground. You are physically in the courts each week. You're seeing what's happening. So if all of a sudden there seems to be a shift in the filings and it's not past due rent, it's something else, then that tells us that something else is going on and that we also then need to come up with a different solution. So the lack of ERAP funds is definitely an obstacle. There are some bad habits that were created by ERAP. Again, like I said, we're shifting to pre-filing. Most of our landlords in Chester County have learned the behavior of we have to file in order to access the ERAP funds. So we have to kind of get them back to, if you reach out to us beforehand, then maybe we can address this without you filing. With the ERAP funding, there were also the bad habits where landlords are used to getting everything that they wanted, all their late fees and everything else. Because of the limited financial resources, we have to kind of convince them, why don't you waive some late fees? But we can then resolve this, which is better than a piece of paper that says that you're owed money. We also have increased rents and reduction of affordable housing. Again, part of the economy, part of the impact of the pandemic. And I'm thinking that we eventually see that shifting. But we do have some advantages now that we no longer have the pandemic and some of the ERAP funding available. It allows us more collaboration with partner agencies and even within our organization. We can increase our household case management opportunities because the funding providers are realizing that case management is what is needed long-term. You can pay somebody's rent for them today, but that doesn't solve next month. And then we have more tenant involvement in establishing the long-term solutions. So with the ERAP, it was the tenants filled out the paperwork, the check was paid, and we couldn't kind of do some coerced case management to say, you know, we can help you going forward, but only if you do the case management. With the ERAP, you just had to give them the money. With the current program, we can do a scenario. If you participate in this case management program, then we can potentially subsidize your rent for a couple of months going forward on a sliding scale. So that is a short version of as to really everything that's involved. We do have some additional statistical data from our program. For calendar year of 2024, as of yesterday afternoon, our EPCR team has reviewed and pre-screened 371 new eviction cases. Not all of those cases are EPCR, but we review and pre-screen every single case. And again, with the outreach, so that when we get to court, we are prepared, which brings us back to that accountability and cooperation. Right now, our program is operating in 3 MDJ courts in Chester County, Coatesville, Downingtown, and one of the Westchester courts. I get shocked every time I see these statistics, but 99% of the households that are assisted by EPCR during the first quarter of 2024 had a tenant favorable outcome with participants maintaining housing. And then I think another trend or statistic that is important is that 62% of our HRN referrals were for some type of relocation assistance. People can't afford to live where they're at. And 38 were for short-term housing stability case management. But I think it also shows that the housing and resource navigator has to be a team role or participant that is flexible and you can utilize in different manners. We may eventually have to switch that into 2 separate positions, one just for relocation, one for case management. Right now, I'm not sure that will make the most sense. But if anybody would, want more information from our program, please feel free to reach out to Robin or myself, and we will be happy to help you out as much as we can, because we received an awful lot of help and assistance from other organizations, including the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance.
Thank you so much, Lori and Robin. So a few questions, and as I said to you all before, we made this webinar shorter to be short and sweet, but there's so much good stuff here to talk about. So the first set of questions is really back to the court involvement and the judges. Can you start by clarifying what is it that the courts do or are providing, which I know at least is, you had indicated that all the cases happen the same day, so they change the schedule. and then you're either on site or you're adjacent. So can you kind of just generally talk about what do the courts do? And then I'll ask it again. But the second question is, if you could talk a little bit more about, like, how did you get the courts, the judges to agree? Because that's something people struggle with, and there's a few questions around that.
So we are actually physically present day of court. So our team right now goes to court every Tuesday and then on Thursday. And the Westchester court is not as unified as I would prefer, but we're kind of adopting to that. So we were fortunate enough that we had 2 district justices in Chester County in the midst of the pandemic and even pre-pandemic that wanted to kind of address this eviction issue. So one of them automatically right away agreed, I will change my scheduling and I will do everything on a unified day so that your team can show up. We physically show up at court. We normally take over one of the court's conference rooms to set up our equipment. Each judge, again, they operate their court in their own manner. So if we have one court where the judge likes to do a call, the list at the very beginning. So we have to be present in court right at 9 o'clock when they start to go down. Here's who we represent. Here's who we don't represent. Here's who we're not sure yet. And then give them a general idea. This one's going to be a hearing. This one we think is going to be a continuance with a settlement agreement. We also need the court staff and the judge to kind of say, I will provide you copies of the landlord-tenant complaints that are filed. Again, each court does their own thing. We're fortunate the one court, their clerk has decided that it's easier rather than responding to our requests every time one's filed, just to give it to us on almost like a standing right to know request. Others, we have to request that we do it, and we don't do it like every day. More importantly, what we do is we check the dockets every day because that's public record. And then we immediately start adding that to our list. And then we start doing as much of the outreach as we possibly can. We used to try to get the complaints from the tenants. We find that they just don't have them or they can't get them to us fast enough. So while our court coordinators are doing the outreach, the attorneys are already reviewing the cases. So if it's a case that we don't know whether we're going to represent or not, we have actually already done any of the background. We've done the legal. We've determined is there a defense based upon the information that we have. We also will get from our county court administrator sometimes a copy of the court's docket list. So again, you have to have a judge that's kind of interested in addressing this issue and is willing to make some changes, but you have to disrupt as little as possible. I would suggest that what you normally want to do and what we've done in the courts as we've expanded is we've actually gone out for a couple of weeks in advance on the court's standard schedule, observed how they conduct their court. And then we've gone back, kind of chatted about how we can kind of fit our program into how they already operate their court, get in there, establish the reputation that this is a good thing. And then sometimes the court will then ask you, is there something I can do to help? And we'll say, that would be fantastic. Thanks.
Great. Can you talk about your role as an attorney employed by friends? There's a question about how would you suggest that role be addressed? Because the question is from someone that doesn't already have that.
So when the program first started, one of the things that we were advised by really Epic and some of the other programs is that you really do need a full-time attorney to staff your program. I've been with the program from the beginning. I worked on a pro bono basis for a period of time and then worked on a contracted basis until they can hire a full-time attorney. But you definitely need that full-time attorney that's always available to handle that. But we kind of operate almost like a mini law firm within the organization. So again, our documentation, we do have clients sign limited representation engagement letters. There is attorney-client confidentiality that applies, that is enhanced compared to what you would have, even though we are a nonprofit organization that deals with individuals with homelessness and confidentiality to begin with.
Great. And did I interrupt you or no?
No.
Okay, I'll add that there are other models where the legal representation is provided in the form of day of representation, which I think you mentioned, Lori, and in terms of other models. And then also sometimes it is provided by pro bono attorneys. You had said that the advice from Epic and Montgomery was to have someone full-time. I think there's always a trade-off of coordinating volunteers in that way. If people can't bring it in-house, that could be an option. And that is the way that the program in the city of Reading has worked. And that's also a pretty effective program. So, different ways to do it depending on kind of what works for you. And certainly, I think I already said this, but volunteer coordination can be challenging. So I know we're a couple minutes over. I'm just going to spend a little more time on a few questions. As people know, if you participate in our webinars, we will send out the recording, but hope you can stick around for just another few questions. So someone's asking about the steps you take when someone has received a notice to quit, and maybe you could actually explain what that is if people don't know, Lori.
So if somebody has received the notice to quit, we know that the landlord cannot file the eviction action before the magisterial district justice within whatever the time period is. It's either 10 days or 30 days, depending on what the notice to quit specifically indicates. If a tenant were to call us and they were in one of our jurisdictions and they had received the notice to quit, we would do the intake to see whether or not they would qualify for our program. Then I would have my court coordinator actually reach out to the property manager or the landlord, depending on what the circumstances were, to find out what's the current situation. Would they be willing to hold off on filing if we came up with a payment plan, and kind of convince them as to why they would like to do that. To say, the minute you file, there's a filing fee which comes out of pocket to you landlords. But if we can work this out in advance, you don't have to outlay that money and you will get your rent going forward. We often will communicate with the landlord that one of the things that we can do is kind of say, we have this case management. And so we will make sure that this house you're not going to be back every single month with this particular type of issue. We can address that issue. Oftentimes we find the biggest frustration really is that the tenants, when they can't pay their rent, they don't know what to do. And so they just kind of hide from the landlord. And so we hear over and over and over again from landlords, they just stopped responding to me. So the mere fact that the tenants reached out to us and then we're reaching out on behalf of the tenant already starts to repair the relationship. And then we can see where we go from there.
Great. So one more question about landlords' receptivity. So I believe you said, and I think I've heard you all say this before, that what has happened is that landlords are starting to reach out to you before filing the eviction because they're having the experience of going through the process. So is that still happening? And just sort of anything more about landlord receptivity? Because I think that we know that this can benefit landlords. I think a lot of times human nature is just like, oh yeah, no, it's a tenant landlord. So if the tenant wins, I'm going to lose, right? So can you just talk a little bit about that?
So we were unfortunate in that with the ERAP, there was the requirement in order to access the ERAP funds, the landlord had to file the landlord-tenant eviction. So everything shifted into that model once that became the rule. The county implemented that because they were having difficulty trying to prioritize whose funding do you get out the door quicker. We were fortunate again with Friends Association is that we had in ERAP processing as one of our other departments. Robin, I think, will tell you how much fun she had with that. But because we were in-house, we then took only referrals that were in courts where we were so that we had, and again, for the longest period of time, we had somebody from our ERAP department coming to court as part of our team dynamic once we were there. So now we have to get everybody back with you don't have to file in order for us to get involved. If you know that you're about to file, please contact us. So what we've done is there's a number of landlords that we had good relationships with. There were a couple that we had actually had a little bit of that model before the ERAP came into effect. And so my strategy is to pick a couple of big property management companies or landlords that own multiple properties, get them on board, and then let them spread the good news to the other landlords.
Great. So I should stop there, although quite a few more questions, including some of mine. You know, we're really focused here at the Housing Alliance and trying to get more money and trying to do some other work around policies to really help take this kind of program to scale, help get it in other communities across the state, et cetera. So we all know that more is needed, but I just really want to focus on the many, many households that your work has really just completely, turned around an experience that is usually quite devastating. So just really want to focus on, we know more is needed, but so many households that you are helping and lots of folks are helping across the state. So thank you, Lori and Robin. We'll send out the recording if people have other questions. They're offering to field those questions directly. You can always contact us here at the Housing Alliance, and just look forward to hearing more about what everybody's trying to do around this issue. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.